Rain hammered the windshield of the black Rolls-Royce like relentless fingers, tapping a cruel rhythm. Thomas Chancellor sat motionless behind the wheel, his once pristine tailored suit soaked and clinging to him like regret. "Mr. Chancellor," the voice crackled coldly from the intercom, "you are no longer welcome. The board has made its decision." The words sliced deeper than he expected. His mansion, his empire, had turned its back on him. His name was still etched on the gates, but his power had dissolved into the storm. As the iron gates shut with a mechanical finality, Thomas tightened his grip on the wheel. He had built this company, mentored the very man who had just ousted him. But now, even his name seemed erased by rain. As he drove away, the world blurred. Headlights, memories, betrayal. In that moment, he had no destination, no plan. Just exile. And yet miles away, someone he once helped without asking for anything in return was about to become his lifeline. A man with nothing but a child, grit, and a sense of loyalty money could never buy. 30 miles away, in a modest one-bedroom apartment, Mark Palmer wrestled a spaghetti-stained toddler into clean pajamas. The child giggled and kicked, unaware of the world unraveling outside their little haven. Mark had calloused hands from long days at the garage, but his touch was always gentle with Lily. His life was simple, no luxury, no safety nets, but it was honest. As he tucked Lily into her thrifted crib, he glanced at the empty chair beside the bed. It once belonged to her mother. Mark sighed, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Sleep tight, warrior." The night carried the sound of distant thunder, but here, in this tiny corner of the world, love built a fortress stronger than steel. The next morning, Mark opened the garage just past dawn. He rubbed his neck, stiff from another night on the couch. The bell above the door jingled as he rolled up the rusted shutter. Outside, the world was gray. Inside, the smell of oil and old metal clung to the air. He glanced at the old photograph taped near the register, Thomas Chancellor shaking his hand years ago, during a random act of kindness. Mark had fixed his car without charge, not knowing the man's wealth. Thomas offered help later, but Mark refused. "Keep your money. Just do good someday," he had said. That day was coming. Across town, Thomas woke up in a motel room, reeking of bleach and stale air. The suit he wore last night lay crumpled on a plastic chair. He splashed cold water on his face, gripping the edge of the sink as he stared into the cracked mirror. Every wrinkle seemed deeper, every mistake more permanent. No calls, no emails. The world had forgotten him overnight. His reflection mocked him. The mighty had fallen, and no one cared. He reached for his phone and scrolled through contacts. One name stopped his finger. Mark Palmer. That's mind. He hadn't spoken to the man in years. But something about that handshake, he dialed. Mark almost didn't answer. He was elbow deep in a busted radiator when the phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then wiped his hands and picked up. "Mark, it's Thomas. I need help." Silence. Mark's brows furrowed. The man who once had the world in his palm now sounded like a broken shell. "Where are you?" Mark asked quietly. An address followed. Mark exhaled, nodded, and tossed his wrench into the bin. "Lily," he called, voice steady. "We're going on a little road trip." Mark's old truck rattled down the highway as Lily hummed along to a cartoon song playing faintly on the radio. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows over the empty road. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale. In the passenger seat, Thomas sat in silence, still wearing the same suit, now wrinkled and stained. He stared out the window, eyes following the blur of landscape as if hoping to outrun his shame. "You're lucky I answer unknown numbers," Mark said with a half-smile, breaking the silence. Thomas nodded slowly, then whispered, "I never forgot what you said. I just never imagined I'd need it." Lily giggled in the back seat, completely unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding. For the first time in hours, Thomas turned from the window and looked at Mark, not as a former CEO, but as a man desperate to rebuild from ashes. They arrived at Mark's small home, just as the sky turned amber. The garage loomed beside the house, a beacon of Mark's sweat and perseverance. Thomas stepped out slowly, blinking against the sunlight, disoriented by the normalcy. "It's not much," Mark said, unlocking the door, "but it's honest." Inside, toys littered the floor, and the smell of burnt toast lingered from breakfast. Lily ran past them, chasing her stuffed animal, laughter echoing through the modest space. Thomas stood still, absorbing the warmth of it all. He had walked halls of marble, signed billion-dollar deals, but this felt more human than anything in years. "Stay as long as you need," Mark said simply, tossing him a blanket. For the first time in days, Thomas felt something settle in his chest, a flicker of gratitude. Later that night, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, a chipped mug of coffee cradled in his hands. Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching him. "You built an empire," Mark said. "How did it come to this?" Thomas took a long sip before answering. "I trusted the wrong people. Gave away pieces of my soul for margins and stock prices." He glanced around the kitchen, worn tiles, drawings on the fridge, a broken clock. "I forgot what mattered." Mark nodded. "That's the thing about power. It only feels real until it's gone." They sat in silence, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the room. In the distance, Lily's soft breathing came through the baby monitor. "You think you'll fight for it back?" Mark asked. Thomas didn't answer immediately. Then, with quiet steel, he said, "Not for revenge, for redemption." The next morning, Thomas offered to help around the garage. He rolled up his sleeves awkwardly, revealing arms unaccustomed to labor. Mark smirked but didn't stop him. "Try not to ruin that shirt," he joked. Thomas worked slowly, carefully mimicking Mark's movements as they lifted an engine hood. The sweat came quickly. Blisters formed faster. But Thomas didn't complain. He listened. He asked questions. By midday, grease marked his hands and his shirt was stained beyond salvation. But his eyes, they were sharper. Present. "You sure you want to keep doing this?" Mark asked, handing him a wrench. Thomas exhaled. "I need to earn my hands again." That evening, they sat outside on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the fading light. Mark cracked open 2 beers and passed one to Thomas. "So what now?" he asked. Thomas stared into the distance, the sound of crickets filling the silence. "I built something great, but I let it rot from the inside. Maybe I was blind, or maybe I just stopped caring." Mark took a sip and nodded. "It's not about how you fall, it's about how you rise, and who you rise for." Thomas smiled faintly. "I've got some ideas, but I'll need help. The kind you can't buy." Mark grinned. "You're in luck. I accept payment in transmission repairs and bedtime stories." They laughed, light and genuine, as Lily ran up and plopped into Thomas's lap. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. He felt like a man about to rebuild. Thomas sat at Mark's kitchen table, a legal pad in front of him, scribbling furiously. The page filled with names, timelines and backroom deals. The underbelly of the empire he once controlled. "If I can prove collusion between the board and Vargas," he muttered, "the buyout clause becomes invalid." Mark leaned over his shoulder, frowning. "That's a lot of ifs." Thomas looked up. "I don't need all of them, just one. One crack, and the whole lie unravels." Mark crossed his arms. "And if there is no crack?" Thomas tapped the page. "Then, I make one." This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth, and reclaiming what was stolen not for pride, but for legacy. For the people betrayed. For the man he used to be. Mark called in a favor. An old friend, Jasmine Vega, worked at security for a rival firm. She arrived that afternoon, sharp suit, sharper eyes. "I'm not doing this for you," she said to Thomas. "I'm doing it for the people who got fired when you weren't watching." Thomas nodded. "Fair." She slid a flash drive onto the table. You've got 24 hours of digital footprints, Vargas board members, some shady offsite backups. You find a pattern, you might have a case. Mark watched them closely. This wasn't just a tech op, it was war. And war needed soldiers. Through the night, the three of them combed through data. Jasmine cracked passwords, while Thomas followed transaction chains and obscure IP addresses. Mark brewed coffee, kept spirits up, occasionally catching details they missed. Vargas transferred assets to a Cayman shell 3 days before the vote, Thomas said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. That's a clear violation of fiduciary law. Mark grinned. You got your crack. The moment pulsed with quiet intensity, proof finally that the coup wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal. The next morning, Thomas stood in front of a corporate building downtown, one he once owned. He wore a clean shirt, borrowed blazer, and carried a flash drive like it was a sword. You sure about this? Mark asked from the curb. Lily perched on his hip. Thomas nodded. It's not just about taking it back. It's about showing them I never left. He stepped inside, each stride more confident than the last. At security, he flashed his old ID. The guard hesitated, then waved him through. Legacy, it seemed, still held a ghost of weight. Inside the boardroom, Thomas faced his former colleagues. Vargas smirked across the table. You have no standing here, Thomas. Thomas placed the flash drive on the table and plugged it in. On screen, transaction logs, emails, and offshore records spilled out. You sold off core assets before the vote. That's fraud. The room shifted. Whispers turned to silence. A senior board member stood. Is this verified? Jasmine, connected remotely, appeared on screen. Every line, time-stamped and traced. Vargas's face drained. Thomas didn't gloat. He simply said, I'm not here to burn this place down. I'm here to remind it what integrity looks like. News traveled fast. By evening, headlines were ablaze. Disgraced CEO exposes corruption, boardroom scandal rocks tech giant. Thomas sat on Mark's porch, scrolling through article after article. Lily sat on his lap, blissfully drawing crayon circles on his worn jeans. Mark handed him a cold drink. You did it, he said. Thomas shook his head. Not yet. Exposing them was just part one. Mark leaned on the rail, watching the fading sky. Then what's next? Thomas looked out with a steadier gaze than before. Rebuild. Not just the company. The culture. The people we left behind. He didn't want his name back on a door. He wanted something cleaner. Something earned. The board had no choice but to act. Vargas was removed, pending investigation. Thomas was offered his CEO position back, but he declined. I don't want the crown, he told the board. I want to build something better. Outside the system you corrupted. Gasps followed, then silence. Instead, Thomas proposed something radical. A cooperative leadership model with employee equity, transparency, and ethics at its core. Some scoffed. Some stared. One older board member smiled faintly. Perhaps that's what we needed all along. As Thomas walked out, briefcase in hand, the building behind him no longer felt like a fortress. It was just concrete. The real foundation was yet to be laid. Back at the garage, the phones rang non-stop. I'm down with you. He built wall. And two, I grant and wise. Media inquiries, investors, old employees wanting to reconnect. Mark opened a letter that arrived by courier. Inside, a certified offer for a co-venture fund backed by whistleblower allies. This is real, he said, handing it to Thomas. Thomas studied the terms, then looked up. We can build it here. Start fresh. Give jobs to the ones left behind. Mark's eyes widened. You want to launch a company from my garage? Thomas grinned. Worked for Hewlett and Packard. Laughter erupted, half disbelief, half exhilaration. They were no longer just repairing engines. They were about to rebuild an empire. Weeks passed in a blur of planning and purpose. Desks were built from scrap wood. A server rig booted up in the back office. Jasmine joined officially, leading cyber development. Former employees trickled in, coders, marketers, dreamers, each one tired of corruption, ready for change. Thomas no longer wore suits. He wore sweatshirts and a quiet fire in his eyes. Mark led operations. Enjoyer. Lily became the unofficial mascot. They named it ReForge. Not because it was easy, but because broken metal can become stronger when reforged. And this time, they do it right. One night, as they watched the new company website go live, Thomas stepped outside for air. Mark joined him, both gazing at the stars. You ever think about that night? The gates, the car, everything gone? Mark asked. Thomas exhaled slowly. What? Every day. But not with regret, with clarity. Mark nodded. Sometimes falling is the best thing that can happen to a man. Thomas turned, eyes softer now. I thought I lost everything, but I found the one thing that matters, who I am without it all. Behind them, cheers erupted. The first client had signed. The phoenix had risen, not from ash, but from oil, grit, and a single dad's porch. ReForge grew faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months they had their first product. An open-source security suite built for small businesses. No red tape, no hidden fees. Just clean, efficient code with a mission behind it. Thomas demoed it at a community tech fair, flanked by Jasmine and Mark. NDs lined up, not for autographs, but for opportunity. You were the guy who used to run Titan Tech? A teen asked. Thomas smiled. Used to. Now I build things people can trust. Cameras flashed, investors called, and yet, Thomas's gaze always drifted back to Lily, drawing dinosaurs in chalk nearby. Fame wasn't the goal. Impact was. With success came resistance. A cease and desist landed in their inbox, from Titan Tech's legal team. They claimed proprietary code infringement. Jasmine reviewed it, eyes narrowing. They're trying to scare us. We built this from scratch. Thomas clenched his jaw. Vargas is testing our resolve. He wants us to fold. Mark stepped in. So what now? Thomas stood, straightened his back. We fight, but not in court. We show them we don't need their throne. We'll build a new table, and we'll make it longer. ReForge didn't pull back, they expanded. More hires. Bigger servers. Stronger code. The message was clear. Integrity wasn't just a slogan. It was their firewall. Jasmine traced the legal attack to a subcontractor Vargas had hired, one with a record of espionage. She called Thomas and Mark into the back room. They planted spyware. It's not just about us, it's about framing us. The weight of betrayal pressed hard. Thomas slumped into a chair. He's not just playing dirty, he's weaponizing my past. Mark put a hand on his shoulder. Then let's remind him who's watching now. Jasmine smiled grimly. I've already flagged it. Their next move is going public. We just need the right moment. The war wasn't corporate anymore. It was personal. They found the moment. At a live-streamed industry panel, Thomas took the mic. Instead of promoting ReForge, he exposed the spyware scheme. Jasmine backed him with forensic data. We were accused of stealing what we never touched, but the real theft was of trust, and we won't stand for it. The audience went silent. Then came applause. Then a flood of support. Public opinion flipped overnight. Tech leaders condemned Titan Tech. Their stock took a hit. Vargas vanished from the public eye. ReForge didn't just survive, it became a symbol. Not of revenge, but resilience. Back at the garage headquarters the team celebrated, but not with champagne or lavish speeches. Mark grilled burgers outside. Lily handed out hand-drawn ReForge hero stickers. Thomas sat in a folding chair, watching his chosen family laugh under string lights. Jasmine joined him, toasting with a soda. You could have taken your empire back, she said. Thomas smiled. I did, just not the way they expected. Across the yard, Mark lifted Lily onto his shoulders. She waved at Thomas, her sticker stuck proudly to her shirt. In that moment, surrounded by firelight and loyalty, Thomas understood. He hadn't just rebuilt a company. He had reforged himself. Weeks after the exposé, ReForge was no longer just a startup, it had become a movement. Universities began requesting Thomas for guest lectures. One morning, he stood in front of a lecture hall filled with business students, dressed not in a suit, but in his ReForge hoodie. He told them about losing everything, about rebuilding from scrap. Legacy isn't built in boardrooms, he said. It's forged in truth. A young woman raised her hand. Would you go through it all again? Thomas looked out across the room. Every fall taught me what success never could. Backstage, Mark watched proudly. From the corner, Lily waved from Jasmine's lap. This wasn't just mentorship. It was a torch being passed to the next generation, with both hands steady. But even as ReForge thrived, Thomas couldn't escape the quiet emptiness that crept in at night. One evening, after Mark and Jasmine had gone home, he sat alone in the garage office, watching old news clips of his rise and fall. He paused on a photo, him with his father at the original Titan Tech launch. I wanted to make you proud, he whispered to the screen. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was forgiving. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a dusty journal, and began to write. Not business plans. Not strategy. Just truth. Memories. Flaws. Gratitude. He wasn't trying to build a monument anymore. He was learning to be whole. The next morning, Mark found Thomas asleep at the desk, journal open, pen still in hand. You writing a novel now? He teased gently. Thomas stirred, groggy but at peace. Just some things I needed to get out. Mark placed coffee beside him and nodded toward the garage bay. Then you'll want to be awake for this. Outside, a crowd of former Titan Tech employees stood waiting, some with resumes, others with nothing but hope in their eyes. You really think we can help them all? Thomas asked. Mark smiled. We're not the same men we were when we met, let's prove it. And just like that, the mission widened. They transformed the garage into a training ground. Coding stations were set up with salvaged laptops, whiteboards covered in diagrams. Thomas taught leadership workshops. Mark ran skill sessions on everything from engine mechanics to project management. Jasmine trained cybersecurity analysts. They didn't ask for degrees, just dedication. Lily wandered freely, her crayon drawings now displayed beside team flowcharts. One night, an older man approached Thomas. I was laid off 10 years ago. Thought I was useless. Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not. You never were. Let's prove that too. Late one evening, the lights still glowing inside ReForge, Thomas stood in the doorway, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. Jasmine joined him, arms folded. You really think this'll last? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked back at the garage full of light and life. It'll last as long as we remember why we started. Not for power, for people. Mark stepped out beside them, Lily asleep on his shoulder. Together, they watched the stars in silence, the hum of purpose behind them. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy forged not in gold, but in grit, failure, and something more enduring: hope. 1 year later, ReForge hosted its first official summit. A gathering of innovators, builders, and believers. Held in a renovated factory-turned-campus, the air buzzed with ideas and second chances. Thomas stepped onto the main stage, applause rising like thunder. He looked out at hundreds of faces, some new, some from the garage's earliest days. We didn't build ReForge to compete, he said. We built it to correct. The room quieted. We're not here because of what we lost. We're here because of what we refused to lose. Each other. As he stepped down, the crowd rose, not for the man, but for the movement. After the summit, Thomas took a walk through the old neighborhood where it all fell apart. The mansion still stood, pristine, gated, cold. But something inside him had changed. He didn't feel envy or resentment, just distance. A man in a suit stepped out of the gates, noticed him, and nodded politely. Thomas nodded back. He wasn't that man anymore. He turned and walked away, each step lighter. What once defined him now simply existed without power over him. The mansion was just stone. His real home was a garage, a child's drawing, and a team that believed in something real. Back at ReForge, Thomas received a letter. Not digital, handwritten. It was from an intern at Titan Tech, someone inspired by the summit. I want to do more than climb. I want to build. How do I start? Thomas smiled, folded the letter, and placed it beside the journal he'd once written in during his lowest moment. He turned to Lily, now a bit taller, coloring quietly at his desk. You start, he whispered, by remembering why you care. He looked out the window at the team, gathered in the yard, planning, laughing. ReForge didn't just change the system. It made a new one, and invited others in. That weekend, the entire ReForge team gathered for a retreat in the mountains. No laptops. No pitches. Just campfires, music, and memory making. Mark played an old guitar. Jasmine grilled marshmallows for Lily. And Thomas, he simply sat by the fire, watching the stars through the pine canopy. Funny, he said. I used to think legacy was what you left behind. Mark handed him a beer. And now? Thomas looked around at the people he'd grown with, fought beside, trusted. Now I think it's what you build while you're still here. With your own hands, with your heart wide open. On the last night of the retreat, Thomas stood at the edge of the cliffside overlooking the forest valley below. He closed his eyes, letting the wind carry every sound, laughter, crackling fire, his heartbeat. In that silence, he found his final truth. He had been a billionaire, then a nobody. Now, he was something far more rare, a man who had nothing to prove, and everything to give. He whispered to the night, you can lose everything, but if you still know who you are, they never really took anything. Behind him, Lily called out, come back, we're doing s'mores. He smiled, turned, and walked back into the light.